My husband left me for my pregnant cousin. I took his money, then handed him a file. You're 100% sterile. I tied the silver ribbon around the pristine white gift box with the exact same precision I used when pipetting DNA samples in my laboratory. My hands were perfectly steady. I remember being mildly surprised by that, considering the sheer magnitude of what I was about to do. I am a clinical geneticist. My entire career is built on decoding the microscopic blueprints of human life, finding the hidden flaws, the inherited tragedies, and the inevitable truths that people try so desperately to ignore. Science, unlike people, does not lie. It does not gaslight, it does not cheat, and it certainly does not sleep with your younger cousin in your marital bed. The end of my marriage did not happen in a single, explosive moment. It was a slow, agonizing bleed, measured in sterile clinic rooms, negative pregnancy tests, and the deafening silence of ultrasound machines. Julian and I had been married for 5 years, and for 3 of them, we tried to build a family. Julian was a prominent real estate developer, a man who obsessively curated his life, his properties, and his legacy. He was charming, commanding, and used to getting exactly what he wanted. When we lost our first pregnancy at 9 weeks, he held me as I cried, whispering that we would try again. When we lost our second at 10 weeks, his embrace grew a little stiffer, his words a little more hollow. By the 3rd miscarriage, the warmth had entirely evaporated from his eyes, replaced by a cold, judgmental distance that cut deeper than any scalpel. I blamed myself. God, I blamed myself so completely that it consumed my every waking thought. I spent my days analyzing the genetic anomalies of my patients, and my nights lying awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering what toxic mutation lurked inside my own body. I scoured my own medical records. My reproductive endocrinologist had found a minor, entirely common variant in my MTHFR gene, a quirk shared by nearly 40% of the population, which rarely impacts fertility. But Julian latched onto it like a lifeline. He refused to undergo his own genetic testing. The doctor said it's your gene, Eleanor, he had told me, his voice carrying an edge of absolute finality. There is no point in me sitting through humiliating tests when we already know your body is the one rejecting our children. His mother, Beatrice, was the one who finally twisted the knife. She was a woman who valued bloodlines and social standing above all else. During a painful Sunday dinner, just weeks after my 3rd DNC procedure, she looked at me over her crystal wine glass and said, "Julian's father and I never had this issue. Our lineage is impeccable. It is a profound tragedy, Eleanor, that your genetics are so hostile to my son's legacy." I had sat there, bleeding into a surgical pad, swallowing my tears because I believed her. I believed I was the broken one. Then came Qley. Qley was my maternal cousin, 8 years my junior, a girl who had spent her entire life trying on my achievements like borrowed clothes. She was 24, unemployed, heavily reliant on her Instagram aesthetic, and constantly embroiled in dramatic relationships. For the last year, she had been desperately clinging to Preston Hughes, the notorious, recklessly wealthy heir to a shipping conglomerate. Preston was infamous in our social circles, not just for his money, but for his striking appearance. He possessed a shock of copper-red hair, startlingly pale skin, and deep, distinct dimples. When Preston unceremoniously dumped Qley and cut her off financially, she showed up at my house, sobbing, claiming she needed a place to stay. I took her in. I made her tea. I gave her the guest room. 4 months later, my husband sat me down in the living room of the house we had built together, with Qley sitting right beside him, her hand resting protectively over her slightly rounded stomach. "She's pregnant, Eleanor," Julian said. His voice wasn't apologetic, it was defiant. "And we are keeping it." I remember the room spinning. I remember the sensation of all the oxygen being violently sucked from my lungs. I looked at Qley, who had the audacity to look at me with a mixture of pity and triumph. "I didn't mean to hurt you, Elle," Qley whispered, her voice dripping with artificial sweetness. "But Julian and we just connected. He was so lonely. And the baby. We just passed the 12-week mark. The NIPT screening came back perfect. It's a healthy boy." Julian stood up, towering over me. "She can give me what you couldn't, Eleanor. A healthy child. A future. I'm sorry, but I am filing for divorce. I want this to be quick and quiet." I didn't scream. I didn't throw the antique vases he loved so much. I simply packed a suitcase and walked out the door, leaving behind 8 years of shared history. Over the next month, the humiliation was absolute. The family gossip mill went into overdrive. Beatrice loudly proclaimed to anyone who would listen that Julian had to save his lineage from my defective womb, framing his infidelity as a noble, tragic necessity. I was discarded, painted as the barren, flawed wife holding a great man back. I moved into a small apartment downtown and let the grief wash over me until there was nothing left but a cold, hollow space. But within that hollow space, the analytical mind of a scientist slowly woke up. Something about Julian's absolute certainty bothered me. Something about the timeline felt jagged, like a piece of a puzzle forced into the wrong slot. Qley had been desperately obsessed with Preston right up until the week she moved into my guest room. And Julian, who had refused all medical testing, was suddenly boasting about a perfectly healthy, naturally conceived pregnancy. While unpacking a box of bathroom items I had hastily swept off the counter on the night I left, I found Julian's old, heavy bristle hairbrush. It was tangled with his dark hair. I stared at it for a long time. I didn't take it to the lab out of a desire for revenge. I took it because the scientist in me, the woman who had hated her own body for 3 years, desperately needed to know the truth. I needed to see the blueprint. After hours, when the hospital lab was empty and bathed in the harsh hum of fluorescent lights, I extracted the DNA from the hair follicles. I ran a comprehensive chromosomal microarray and a high-resolution karyotype. I sat in the sterile silence, smelling the faint odor of ethanol, and waited for the sequencer to render the code of the man who had broken me. When the results populated on my screen, I stopped breathing. I leaned closer, my eyes scanning the data, my mind instantly translating the complex genomic architecture. There it was. Not a minor variant, not a harmless quirk, but a massive, catastrophic structural anomaly. Julian carried a highly complex balanced translocation involving chromosomes 3, 4, and 21. Because the translocation was balanced within his own cells, he was perfectly healthy. But when his body produced sperm, the genetic material would divide unevenly. The clinical reality hit me with the force of a physical blow. Statistically, 99% of Julian's sperm would create embryos with severe, fatal chromosomal imbalances. They were entirely incompatible with life. Every single pregnancy he initiated naturally was mathematically destined to end in a first-trimester miscarriage. Every tear I shed. Every agonizing cramp. Every time I apologized to him in the dark. Every time his mother insulted my bloodline. None of it was my fault. My body hadn't been failing, my body had been doing exactly what it was biologically programmed to do, rejecting fatally flawed, fragmented DNA. Julian was profoundly, incurably infertile without the intervention of highly advanced IVF and pre-implantation genetic testing, which he had explicitly refused because he was too arrogant to believe he could be the problem. I sat in the glow of the monitor and began to laugh. It was a jagged, breathless sound that echoed in the empty lab. Because if Julian was genetically incapable of producing a healthy, spontaneous pregnancy, then whose perfectly healthy, 12-week-old fetus was Qley carrying? The timeline snapped into brutal, undeniable focus. Preston Hughes. The breakup. Qley's sudden desperation for a place to stay. She had come to my house already pregnant with a billionaire heir's child, knowing Preston would never marry her. She needed a wealthy, stable scapegoat. And my husband, blinded by his own ego and desperate to prove his virility, was the perfect target. Qley hadn't just stolen my husband, she had conned him into buying someone else's legacy. In my line of work, we are taught that once you discover a critical mutation, you do not panic. You document, you prepare, and you present the findings at the most clinically appropriate moment. I did not call Julian. I did not confront Qley. Instead, I called my divorce attorney. I knew Julian wanted a rapid divorce. He wanted to marry Qley before the baby was born to avoid any social stigma, to present a perfect, unbroken image to his high society friends. I used his desperation as a weapon. I demanded everything liquid. I took my entire share of our joint investments, the clinic stocks, my full retirement, and a massive cash buyout for my half of the house. I let him keep the physical property, the expensive cars, and his pride. He signed the papers with eager arrogance, believing he was paying a small price to rid himself of his defective wife. He thought he had won. 6 months later, the divorce was finalized, the money was securely in my accounts, and Qley went into labor. I heard about the birth through the family grapevine. Julian had rented out a private suite at the most expensive hospital in the city. Beatrice was practically vibrating with joy, boasting on social media about the arrival of the new heir to their family line. They named the boy Julian Arthur Pierce, II. 2 weeks after the birth, Beatrice threw a lavish sip and see party at the house that used to be mine. The entire extended family was invited, along with Julian's wealthy business partners. I, of course, was not on the guest list. But I didn't need an invitation to deliver a gift. I arrived at the house at 2 in the afternoon, wearing a tailored emerald green dress, looking more rested and radiant than I had in years. The chatter in the grand living room died instantly the moment I stepped through the double doors. Dozens of eyes turned to me in shock. Beatrice dropped her champagne flute, it shattered on the hardwood floor. "What is the meaning of this?" Beatrice hissed, stepping forward to block my path. "You have no right to be here, Eleanor. Get out before I have you thrown out." "I'm not here to cause a scene, Beatrice," I said, my voice calm, carrying easily across the dead silent room. "I just came to deliver a gift for the baby. As a geneticist, I feel it's my professional duty to ensure a child's medical history is fully understood." Julian pushed his way through the crowd, his face flushed with anger. Behind him, sitting on the velvet sofa I had picked out 3 years ago, was Qley. She was holding the baby. I looked past Julian and locked eyes with my cousin. Then, I looked down at the infant in her arms. It was almost poetic. Genetics is a powerful, undeniable force. The baby did not have Julian's olive skin or straight dark hair. The infant had a shock of bright, unmistakable copper-red hair, startlingly pale skin, and, as the baby let out a small cry, 2 deep, distinctive dimples appeared on his cheeks. He was a miniature, perfect replica of Preston Hughes. I saw the tension in Julian's jaw. I saw the desperate, frantic denial in his eyes as he looked at the baby, trying to convince himself that the red hair came from some distant, forgotten ancestor. Qley was deathly pale, shrinking back into the cushions, her eyes wide with terror as she looked at me. She knew. "Eleanor, leave," Julian demanded, though his voice shook slightly. "Now." I smiled, a soft, genuine smile, and handed him the pristine white box. "Open it, Julian. It's for the baby's future. And for yours." He hesitated, his arrogance warring with a sudden, creeping dread. The entire room was watching. Slowly, with trembling fingers, he untied the silver ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of tissue paper, was a framed, certified copy of his chromosomal microarray report. Attached to the glass was a letter I had typed on my hospital letterhead. I didn't need him to read it out loud. I had memorized the words. "That is a complete mapping of your DNA, Julian," I said, my voice ringing crystal clear in the suffocating silence. "You have a balanced translocation of chromosomes 3, 4, and 21. What that means, in simple terms, is that you are virtually sterile. Your sperm cannot produce a viable pregnancy. Every miscarriage we suffered was because your genetics were fundamentally flawed, not mine." Julian stared at the paper, all the blood draining from his face. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Beatrice let out a strangled gasp, grabbing his arm to look at the document herself. "Which means," I continued, turning my gaze slowly back to Qley, who was now openly weeping, clutching the red-haired baby to her chest, "it is biologically impossible for you to be the father of that child. Though I'm sure Preston Hughes will be fascinated to learn he has a son." The collapse of a man's entire reality is a profound thing to witness. I watched Julian's eyes dart from the incontrovertible medical evidence in his hands, to his mother, and finally, to the young woman on the couch holding a child that carried the blood of another man. The family legacy he had sacrificed me for, the brutal lies he had let me believe, the empire of deceit he and Qley had built, it all crumbled to ash in the span of 30 seconds. There was no screaming yet. Just the devastating, suffocating weight of the truth crushing the air out of the room. I didn't wait for the fallout. I had done my job. I turned on my heel and walked out of the grand double doors, leaving them trapped in the wreckage of their own making. Stepping out into the crisp, autumn afternoon, I took a deep breath. For 3 years, I had let them convince me that I was broken. But as I walked to my car, entirely unburdened, I realized the most beautiful thing about science. It strips away the noise, the gaslighting, and the cruelty, leaving only the truth. And the truth had finally set me free.